Hello, everyone. This is Bonnie and Kim Crum, and we are the editors of the Boom Project book, Voices of a Generation. It's an anthology of poetry, prose, memoir, fiction, nonfiction. And today we have with us one of the authors who is featured in our Boom Project book, Linda Neal Reising. And she is a poet, but in our book, she actually wrote a fiction story loosely based on James Dean. So welcome, Linda.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, this is the Boom Project Writers YouTube channel. And we're glad that you're here. So bear with me a minute. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Linda. Linda is a native of Oklahoma and a member of the Western Cherokee Nation. She's been published in numerous journals, including the Southern Indiana Review, the Comstock Review, and Nimrod. Reising's work has also appeared in a number of anthologies, including the Boom Project, Fruit Flesh, Seeds of Inspiration for Women Who Write by HarperCollins, and Know This Place, Poetry of Indiana, Indiana Historical Society Press. She was named the winner of the 2012 Writer's Digest Poetry Competition. Her chapbook, Rewriting Family History from Finishing Line Press, was a finalist for the 2015 Oklahoma Book Award, as well as winner of the 2015 Oklahoma Writers Federation Poetry Book Prize. In 2018, her work was nominated for a Pushcart Prize by the editors of So It Goes, the literary journal of the Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library. The Keeping, her first full-length book of poetry, was published by Finishing Line Press in 2020. Her second full-length book, Stone Roses, was published by Kelsay Books in 2021. Linda's claim to fame, besides writing, is that she used to sing as a soloist for weddings and funerals. In recent pre-pandemic times, her singing was mainly done with the church choir. Before being confined to her house in Poseyville, for over a year, she enjoyed traveling, especially to the mountains of Colorado, where she actually slid down Andrews Glacier and Mackinac Island. Her hobbies also include reading and genealogy. So welcome, Linda, quite accomplished. And before we started, she was telling me about how she had two books accepted during the pandemic, now published. And I think she's going to share some of poems from that today. So Linda, we're going to let you take over and tell us about your books and read to us.
Okay. As I was telling Kim earlier, it was kind of a mixed blessing that I had two books accepted very, very closely together, but they happened to occur during a pandemic. The first one was The Keeping, and this is through Finishing Line Press. And it's really a collection of poems from quite a few years. It's divided into three sections. The first section is what I call my Oklahoma poems, a lot about growing up and childhood, teenage years, that sort of thing. The middle section deals with nature and sometimes the relationship of nature to man. And then the third section is all about women, mainly strong women. And this was accepted in January, I believe, of 2020, and it came out in September of 2020. The Stone Roses book is through Kelsay Books, and this one was accepted in April of 2020. Beautiful. But it just came out at the end of March in 2021. They held this one up thinking that the pandemic might be over when it was released, but it was not. So they went ahead and released it.
What a beautiful cover.
Thank you. I love this cover. It was by an artist. This is based upon an oil painting by a man named Dave Mallon. And when I was looking for a cover for this book, I just typed in to Google Pioneer Woman Roses, and this painting came up. And I just thought, I have to have that painting for my cover. So I contacted him through Messenger via Facebook, and he was so kind. And I didn't realize at the time he's a very, very famous illustrator. And he agreed to let me use this as the cover of my book. So I'm very, very grateful to him because it is such a beautiful, beautiful painting. And to me, it was exactly what I was looking for. This book is based upon the really three things, but it's originally based upon the WPA interviews that were done during the 30s. And it was women pioneers from Oklahoma interviews. Most of those women were, well, they were all born sometime in the 1800s. And some of them speak of their childhoods or growing up in Oklahoma, but they also tell the stories of their mothers and their grandmothers. So some of the stories are very old. So I based the poems on those stories, but I also used, of course, imagination, and I used research because I felt that their stories had so much richness, but they were so condensed. They didn't tell the full story. And so I wanted to develop them more. In the original interviews, the women were all anonymous. They didn't have names. And I wanted them to have names. So I went back and I looked up names that were popular in the 1800s. And I assigned names to all of the women. I kept the designations they had given them in the interviews, which were ethnicity and years of birth. But the names I just fabricated.
Well, you can do that as a poet.
Right.
And anywhere else. So we're anxious to hear.
Are we ready to read now?
We are ready.
Okay. I thought I would start with the keeping. And I thought I would read just one poem from each section of the keeping to give you an idea of what they're like. This first poem is called Last Kiss. And for those of us of a certain age, we might remember that song, Last Kiss. When J. Frank Wilson and the Cavaliers headlined with Paul and Paula at the Civic Center in '64, on the same stage where Marty Robbins and Farron Young in rhinestone suits had once strummed their Gibsons, twanged their country ballads, I was there, having just sacrificed my braids to an Annette Funicello do that would never stay curled, tagging behind my sister and aunt, only a few years older, but worldly, sporting white pedal pushers, pocketed Chesterfields. And even when Paula, claiming illness, was replaced by a drummer in drag, I didn't care since I was there for J. Frank, with his lacquered curls and inky eyes that could not see on that summer night the car wreck that would almost kill him, the 8 marriages that waited to fail, his alcoholic death at 49, that title of one-hit wonder haunting him to the grave. And as he grasped the microphone and whined out Last Kiss, I stood, swayed to the beat, both of us on our way.
Oh, wow.
And the second poem is from the section on nature. And I think the only thing that you might need to know about this before I read it is when I mention spoonbill, I'm not talking about the bird, but rather the fish. And where I grew up in Oklahoma, it seems like it's always around spring break time, but people line the banks of the Neosho River and try to hook. You don't fish in a traditional way, you just try to hook them as they go through on the river. And this is entitled Every Little Being. I watch the angler drag the spoonbill onto the riverbank, its side bleeding from being snagged. After the fisherman removes the barb, the paddle-nosed creature begins swimming through grass, desperate to reclaim the Neosho. It arches its back, lifts its great head, gasping, gasping. I'm reminded of something the vet hired by the county once told me. There is such a will to live in all of us. When animals were not adopted, it was his job to euthanize, beautiful word for kill. He saw it in every little being, this struggle against death. And then his wife, battling for years, shriveled by treatments, still strove to stay, even when he told her it was okay to go. Still, though, he was haunted by the dogs, their tails thumping against the table, their gentle whines, the ones who begged for their lives and knowing still licked his hands.
Ooh, ooh. Nice.
Thank you. And then the last one I'll read from The Keeping is the title poem. And this is the one, this is the section about women. The Keeping. I have heard there are those who hack away at grief, shearing sorrow over a lover's grave. But my grandmother was not one. Widowed after 50 years of marriage to a man who thought women had no need for swimming or driving or schooling. A man who took her to the hospital after the home birth of their 5th child, only when the bleeding could not be quelled, but then carried her back to the truck when the doctor said she should bear no more children. A man who let her lie in bed for a year, too weak to stand, while daughters no older than 9 or 10 played mother to the younger ones. A man who crowed when the next 3 babies were boys. No, my grandmother never cut her hair, still colored braids coiled into a crown. And sometimes on Sundays, after taillights turned toward other homes, she would sit with me, unpin her plates, letting her hair tumble, fresh turned furrows down her back, the silver brush sparking tiny lightning strikes like flint against stone, untangling the hair my grandfather demanded she never cut. A man once told me that a woman only cuts her hair when she has given up, but he was wrong. Sometimes it is in the keeping.
Whoa.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you. These next 2 poems will be from Stone Roses, And again, the only titles they have are the names of the women and then the ethnicity and the year of birth. Sally Anglo, born 1869. Father would sit still as a stone at the well, waiting for the bees to sip from the trough nearby, storing water in their crops before ferrying it home to the hive. Once they took flight, a line of buzz back to a hollow tree or rock crevice, he would follow through white clover, goldenrod, milkweed. He only stole from them in June or early July, giving time to make more sweetness before frost. He would build a small brushy fire near the entrance. Then once the bees were stunned, he used his knife to break the comb, mining for gold, letting it ooze inside a metal pan like the 49ers used. In years since, I have learned that bees only live about a month in the wild, only make a thimbleful of honey in a lifetime. Imagine that, a whole life inside a thimble. And the last one I'll be reading is entitled Nettie, Cherokee, born 1851. They were called pins because they tucked cross pins under the colors. May I start over?
Yes, absolutely.
Nettie, Cherokee, born 1851. They were called pins because they tucked cross pins under the collars of their coats or fastened them to the chests of their calico shirts worn with turbans, dress most men in our nation had traded for suits and hats. Born from a secret society, this group was made of Cherokee Unionists, followers of the Red Path, blood revenge, which they sought to heap upon us, Cherokee Confederates. When I was no more than 12, they stopped at the gate of Abe Woodall, our neighbor, called him to the door and shot him without ever dismounting. That same day, before we heard they were going to burn down our house, before my mother carried the husk of my father wasting away for weeks to a nearby cave, before I stumbled behind her, his featherbed and pillows in tow, before we saw the night sky glow with embers, the pins rode into our yard, grabbed Uncle Thomas from the porch, and while my sisters and I watched from the windows, they slit open his chest with a hunting knife, took out his heart still beating, and for a few seconds, I saw the devil holding the blood moon in his mighty hands.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. All of them.
Thank you.
Quite moving and amazing. And what I note, and I'm going to ask Bonnie to say something too, but the things I noticed about that was there was so much storytelling.
Yes.
And some of it was first person you, and some of it was in the persona of these Cherokee women, but it was all storytelling. I mean, which is attractive to me as a non-poet, but it had all the layers and language of great poetry. So I don't know, what did you notice, Bonnie?
Well, the very same thing, but I also thought it resonated and told so much of the sort of racism that has not yet been dissolved. And it was so timely. It's almost a universal theme, and the timeliness of it certainly transfers from the 1800s to the 2020s. So it sounded like it was a very important poem. I'm glad you wrote it, because the words and the message in it were just really necessary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's like all poetry, there's always death and life and sometimes sex. But what I love, the research-based aspect of your Stone Roses book is fascinating too, because these are real people with names that you've given them, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, their stories are true. And all I did was just kind of try to add another dimension, add depth, add detail that maybe they didn't have in their interviews, because they were all very, very brief. And so I researched who those pins were. And the lady did tell the story about her uncle's assassination in their front yard. So that part is true. I just added, details and things, and did a lot of research about who these people were, and how they were different from the other Cherokees. But I also have several poems about the freed women. And again, I felt a little strange writing from the perspective of someone who was Black. But I thought, well, I'm telling her story. I'm just adding to her voice. It wasn't like I was changing any of the stories that they were telling.
Mm-hmm.
And they were also women who were adopted by, some of them were adopted by the Cherokees. Some of them have been adopted by the Choctaws. And when you talk about the racism in their poems, it's amazing how things that were happening then are still happening today. The cruelty and the racism and things. We think that we've come a long way, but in some ways we haven't come very far at all.
No, not at all. And the story you told of your grandmother was quite something. Enraging in a way. I'm wondering, you probably are, your book is probably appealing to people outside literary circles because of its historical merit. Have you found that to be true?
I hope that is true. And in fact, one thing I'm going to do, I have had postcards printed up for Stone Roses, and I'm going to send them to all the libraries in Oklahoma, because I do think it's going to have a wider audience than just poets. I know that one of the people who did the blurb for me even said that it really should be used as a history book and in schools. And I would love to see that happen. So that because they are true stories, but they're told in a different way. So it would be a great way for English and history to work together on something.
Wonderful. And so you kind of come full circle, because you were an English teacher, weren't you?
I was an English teacher for many, many years. I taught in Oklahoma for 2 years. And then we moved to Indiana, and I earned my master's degree. And while I was doing that, I substitute taught for 3 years. And then I taught full time for 27 years at the junior high level. I also taught at the college level. So I've taught everybody from kindergarten on up, pretty much.
And I remember, I think it was at our New Harmony Gallery reading, there was someone in the audience who had been one of your students.
Yes, I almost always have students come to my readings. And I've had a lot of students comment on my books, which makes me happy. And a lot of them have been successful in writing and different things. So,
which makes you happy too.
Which makes me very happy.
Yes. Well, this is about writers, their writing, their lives, their writing journey, and thoughts and ideas about process. So I guess one of the things we've asked writers to do is come up with like a 5-word description of their writing life, or yeah, and you were able to come up with one?
I think I can sum up my writing life in 3 words, which is never give up.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
I have been writing pretty much all my life, but life kind of gets in the way. And as you were talking about, the fact that I was a teacher, when I was in school and I would tell teachers, I want to grow up to be a writer, they would say, well, become an English teacher and then you can have lots of free time to write.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, that does not happen. If you're doing it properly, that does not happen. And not only did I teach writing, but I was also an academic coach for many, many, many years. And I did Spell Bowl and Who's Your Super Bowl. And I'm very well. I would like to be modest, but I'm not. We won many, many state championships. And in order to do that sort of thing, it takes a great deal of work, not only on the part of the students, but on the part of the teacher. And so my writing was kind of put on a back burner. And then what really changed my life was in 1993. I had already been teaching for many, many years. And I was just getting a little stale and wanted something different. And I attended the Indiana Writing Project at Ball State, lived there for a summer, and we were put through all of the exercises that we were then to bring back to our classrooms. So we were required to write short stories. And in fact, the story that I submitted to the Boom Project was the short story I wrote at Ball State. And so we wrote short stories, we wrote essays, we wrote poetry, and it was all women that summer. And the women in my group said, why are you not a published author, when they started hearing my work? And it really encouraged me, because I had been published in college, but I hadn't been published in any well-known journals or anthologies or anything. And so I came back making up my mind that not only was I going to bring the writing project back to my classroom, but I was going to write along with the students. And so that's what I started doing. When they wrote poetry, I wrote poetry. If they wrote short stories, I wrote short stories. And so that really got me back into it. And then I submitted one of my poems to a contest through the Writers Guild in Evansville. And it won first place. And so they contacted me, said, would you be in the Writers Guild? And I said, okay. And so that started a relationship with other writers in the area. And then it was just after that, everything just kind of took off.
And you're also talking about relationships in writing. And I think, people don't know that. People think writing is a solitary profession. It's not even a profession, avocation. And it's so not.
No. At one point, I was in 3 writers groups. I was in the Writers Guild, which had a lot of very well-known, established writers in it. I don't know whether you know Marilyn Durham, the late Marilyn Durham, who wrote The Man Who Loved Cat Dancing.
Oh, wow.
She was a member of our group. We're talking really well-established writers. And so it was a different type of group. They were all very professional. And then I was with a group called the Writer's Block, which was all women. And we did a lot of journaling. We would have retreats. We were all very close. We had it was almost like being in therapy. So very, very different. And then the group that I am still in that is closest to my heart is, of course, First Mondays. And that's my very small group of very close-knit friends. And we listen to each other's writing, we encourage each other, and they are my best friends. And they have been now for over 20 years.
Wow.
So it just, you really need to, as I was going to say, when we're going to ask the question maybe about any advice I would give a writer, I would say you need to find your tribe.
Yes.
You need to find someone who is about at the same level you are, perhaps, and who will give you the encouragement to go ahead when you're ready to give up, and to be honest with you too. If something is not good, say, you need to work on this. Not always just saying this is good.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, and Bonnie and I are in a couple of writing groups together, and I think for us, I don't know, I can't always speak for Bon, but it's helped us get through this pandemic. I mean, it's and it's the only way we've been able to continue our writing lives and nurture each other in more ways than writing. So that's a good thing.
And I think that, excuse me, I think that's especially necessary for writers, because much of what we do is in isolation, but we get nourished through our community.
Yeah. So, but finding your tribe takes on more powerful connotations with you because you actually have one.
Yes, exactly.
So one of the things that I've always been curious about as a writer, I don't like to label my quiet times or the times when the muse isn't inspiring me as writer's block, but I don't really know. And I'm always interested in what published writers like yourself think about writer's block or how they get over it.
I will be honest, during the pandemic, especially early on, I don't know what was happening, but I just could not concentrate. I even had a hard time concentrating on reading. And so I don't look at it as writer's block. I look at it as ebb and flow.
Okay.
And I think that all writing has an ebb and a flow. And you just have to kind of learn to ride those waves. And I remember the first poems I wrote during the pandemic. I think I cried after I wrote those because I had been so depressed and I didn't know whether I'd ever write again. There was just so much going on, and trying to protect everybody around me, and trying to hold everything together. And I did not know whether I would write again. And what really helped me was having a prompt. I'm not saying these poems will ever be published, but when the Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library sent out a prompt for their next So It Goes issue, it was all about the environment and nature and things like that. And I sat down and I wrote several poems specifically for that issue. And like I say, they might never be published, but it was such a relief to me. It was just like this release of all these months of, just stress and worry. And I was able to put pen to paper and actually write for the first time in a long time. So I do think it helps if you're stuck. What I always do, number one, is to read other people's work. And I do that a lot of times when I sit down to write. The first thing I'll do, and in fact, I have a whole stack of books here. I'm looking at the titles, but it's like Whale Day by Billy Collins is on my table, or I have Nathan Brown's 100 Years, or I have a copy of Rattle, and I'll just pick up a book and I'll just start reading, and it kind of gets me into what I call the zone. Mm-hmm. But sometimes if that doesn't work, then it helps to go to a prompt, even if you're never going to submit it any place, just to get the juices flowing again.
And yeah, good. Have you noticed that any of your writing that your writing or your themes have changed during the pandemic?
Well, one of the poems I wrote for the Kurt Vonnegut thing was really about what happened to the wildlife during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. It's all about these towns and cities being invaded by all of these animals. I loved seeing the pictures of, like, even in Wales and all these different countries, of these sheep and different, all the coyotes and all these different things coming into all these places and kind of taking over. And I love that idea of, is that the way it's going to be when we're no longer here, that all these animals will come back and take over everything.
Yeah, I love that.
So yes, I did write about that.
Okay, good. Yeah, there's going to be a library full of pandemic photos, poems, and prose, I think, journaling. So as we begin to wrap up, of course, I want to make sure Bonnie has her questions answered.
Well, I just wanted to point out for listeners that 2 of the Indiana Poet Laureates have applauded your book. Sherry Wagner says that it's powerful. And certainly the poems you've read to us are I have The Keeping on order. It has, I was hoping it would arrive before this, but it hasn't. Our mail, I think, has been affected by the pandemic as well. And then the other one was Norbert Knopf, who had also commented on the proficiency in writing, but the storytelling element too. So I thought those were wonderful endorsements. And if anybody's on the fence about the book, that's enough to throw them over, I think, if they haven't heard you. It certainly speaks for itself and doesn't need such endorsements, but I was glad to find that, and I wanted to share those comments with our readers.
Well, thank you for doing that. And Norbert wrote an incredible intro to my book. I had asked him to do just a blurb, and he wrote an entire intro that has since been published in another journal as a review of my book. Also, Stone Roses was reviewed by 3 former Poets Laureate of Oklahoma.
Ooh.
So very excited about that too.
Deal with that almost a high and try to remain humble. You got to learn the technique of humble brag.
What large city in Oklahoma were you near?
We are about 80 miles from Tulsa.
Okay.
Northeast, in the very northeastern tip of Oklahoma.
That's interesting. I was just there last year and was on a Cherokee preserve for a wedding, actually, and in a near to Tulsa.
Right.
Something familiar.
Yeah, Tahlequah is the Cherokee capital in Oklahoma, and that's just a little bit south of where I grew up.
Okay. So you're familiar with Bartlesville and Copan?
Oh, yes, yes. And in fact, an interesting fact, my great-great-grandmother, her allotment, she had 3 allotments, and one of them was in Bartlesville. She never did get to see it. One was in Claremore, one was in Bartlesville, and one was in the Jay Grove area where she lived. But ironically, the 2 allotments that she lost were the ones where oil was discovered.
Oh, great.
Ironically, oops.
Yeah, ironically.
There's so much. I think handling such a big issue as the treatment of the indigenous people is maybe best done in poetry. Mm-hmm. And as Ray Bradbury says in that book, Arts and the Zen of Writing, he writes, read poetry every day. And my friend who writes novels says, poetry is like Pilates for your prose. So, and isn't that wonderful?
I love that.
I'm good at Pilates, but I'm pretty good at reading poetry. And yes, I do agree because of all the careful word choices and things. So read The Keeping and Stone Roses poetry to make your writing improve and to learn something and to be immersed in stories. So good luck with your book marketing.
Well, thank you.
How challenging that can be during.
Definitely.
So maybe we can have you to Louisville sometime and you can read here.
Oh, I would love that.
Well, so would we.
Maybe we would too. Yes. And
Well, thank you so much.
good luck with your writing.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Linda.
Thank you.
Bye.